Thanks, Senator Johnson. Welcome, Governor Noem, and thank you for being here. Thank you for visiting with me, and thank you to your family for their service as well. Let me begin on a high note, thanking Senator Hawley for his leadership on the effort that I led with him to essentially get some basic facts out of the Secret Service when we were investigating, Senator Johnson and I, as leaders of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation, helping to lead it with the chairman and ranking member here. And I'm hoping that you've read our report and that you will agree to begin implementing its recommendations, which call for major reforms, in my view, a house cleaning top to bottom in the Secret Service, and greater transparency with this committee and with the American public.
Yes, sir. I will certainly work with you to do that and to work to make sure that we have that transparency and the committee has the information that it needs to do due diligence of its oversight.
Our investigation is continuing.
Yep.
Senator Johnson and I have discussed it, and we will be making more requests to pursue the fact-finding that is so important. I want to ask you about disaster relief. California is on fire. The fires raging there are going to leave destruction and devastation that is heartbreaking. I am really disappointed with some of the statements that President-elect Trump has made. For example, saying that, quote, "We won't give him," referring to Governor Newsom, "money to put out all his fires, and if we don't give him money to put out fires, he's got a problem." The specter is there of potential discrimination based on politics, withholding money from California or other states. It's not an unfounded fear. In the last administration, there were public reports about President Trump withholding money from the state of Washington because of his disagreements with Governor Inslee. Connecticut, like the rest of the nation, suffers from these natural disasters. Most recently, in August, we were hit by major flooding, and these natural disasters are going to become more frequent, as will be the need for the federal government to meet the requests for declarations of natural disaster. I assume you will agree with me that withholding disaster relief by President Trump or any other chief executive of the United States is a violation of his duty and of law.
Well, Senator, leadership has consequences, and looking at the tragedy that's happening in California,
I want to ask you yes or no, with all due respect.
Yeah.
It's an easy.
What's happening in California is the ramification of many decisions over many years. But under my leadership at the Department of Homeland Security, there will be no political bias to how disaster relief is delivered to the American people.
So if President Trump were to say to you, "We're going to withhold money from Connecticut or Michigan or any of the states, Iowa, because we don't like the governor or we don't like the politics of the state," you would stand up to him and say, "Mr. President, we need to allocate that money"?
Well, Senator, in 3 days, President Trump will take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law in this country, and he will do that, and I'll be glad to have him back.
And I don't
speak to hypotheticals, which is what you're asking me to do, but what I will tell you is that as Secretary, I will do the same. I will deliver the programs as the
Well, it's more than a
dictate.
hypothetical, with all due respect, and I apologize for interrupting you, but my time is limited, as you know, as a veteran of these hearings. It's more than a hypothetical. It's based on experience with President Trump withholding money from Washington State and elsewhere. I need to know from you, will you stand up to the President and say, "No, the Constitution and the Impoundment Act requires us," for example, to allocate the $100 billion that we have just appropriated in the last session to states like Connecticut, $3 million, Texas, $10 million, almost every one of the states represented here. Will you say no to the President if he withholds that money?
Sir, I don't know about the scenarios that you're referencing with President Trump, but what I will tell you is that if given the chance to be Secretary of Homeland Security, that I will deliver the programs according to the law and that it will be done with no political bias. And if the programs change or if you decide to change the rule of law, then I will follow that while
So you
adhering to the
pledge to
Constitution.
allocate and distribute that $100 billion.
According to how the program is written with no political bias.
Thank
Every
you.
American deserves to be there and have disaster relief the same as their neighbors.
Basically following the law.
Yes.
Let me ask you, Senator Peters asked you about homegrown terrorists. The New Orleans tragedy was the result of a homegrown terrorist born in this country, radicalized by ISIS. And it reflects the reason why the intelligence community, the FBI, almost all of our law enforcement has said repeatedly, domestic violent extremism is the most lethal and persistent threat to our security. That terrorist was radicalized by ISIS. The investigation is underway. We don't know all the facts, but we do know that he was a military veteran and ISIS was responsible for radicalizing him. Shouldn't we focus on ISIS as a threat to this country's security?
Senator, certainly we should be focused on all threats to this nation's security. That's the mission of the Department of Homeland Security, and homegrown terrorism is growing. We have more and more incidences. The tragedy we saw and the terrorist attack in New Orleans.
What will you do to combat it? What will you do to stop ISIS and other extremist organizations from radicalizing people in this country?
Well, certainly, Senator, I'll continue to work with the administration and our partners and the Department of Defense, the intelligence agencies, also within Secretary of State and the other branches and cabinet officials to make sure we're bringing all resources to bear to identify and to stop these types of terrorist activities. What I would say is the cybersecurity and intelligence elements that we have within the Department of Homeland Security have been incredibly siloed. They have not communicated with other intelligence agencies like they should and partnered. INA has some interaction, but not enough. And we also need to have CISA have interaction with the FBI, CIA to make sure they're working together to stop these types of threats and identify when they're growing among our citizens and how they become radicalized.
This area of questioning, I think, is supremely important. I know there's a lot of focus on the border. We all want more border security. We want to stop migrant crime, but let's not take our eye off the ball. The governor of Louisiana for the Super Bowl ought to be really riveted on the potential for homegrown terrorism as a threat. And I hope that you will help him and other governors to do their duty to protect the people of the United States from that homegrown terrorist threat.